It's such a mix of stress and disappointment, and I definitely had some, resentment towards Burton for a bit of just, where am I going now? And is this sort of the end of this time? Since I was 12, that's all I could think about. I think at that time I was probably 21, and it hurt, and I really didn't know what was going to happen next. I was listening to what was available at Burton, and not a lot was coming up, and I started looking elsewhere too. And Allison and I were together at that time too, so she heard me go through a bit of it, and we thought about, do we go to Colorado? Where do we go next? But
podcasting from Boulder, Colorado. This is the Baby Got Backstory podcast, where we dive into the story behind the story of today's most inspiring storytellers, creators, and entrepreneurs. I like big backstories, and I cannot lie. I am your host, Mark Gutman. This episode of Baby Got Backstory is sponsored by Wild Story. Wait a second. I bet you're saying, isn't that your company? It is. And without the generous support of Wild Story, this show would not be possible. Brands across the world are discovering that their overall strategic and verbal approach, also known as their brand story, is what glues them together and drives who and what they really are. Are you one of those brands that is taking advantage of this superpower? Are you finding that showing up consistently, both internally and externally, is a problem? Or maybe you can't tell your brand story in 2 to 3 minutes in a way that captures the interest of your employees and customers. Then get in touch with us, the team behind Wild Story. We can help. One of my favorite sayings about entrepreneurship is, if you want to understand the entrepreneur, study the juvenile delinquent. The delinquent is saying with his actions, this sucks. I'm going to do my own thing. And since I never wanted to be a businessman, I needed a few good reasons to be one. I wish I came up with that quote myself, but that's from the legendary founder of Patagonia, Yvon Chouinard. And we normally don't start the show off with a quote, but for today's guest, this quote says it all. I'm Mark Gutman, and on today's episode of Baby Got Backstory, how a passion for snowboarding, photography, and entrepreneurship positioned Mike Arzt to travel the world, chase snow, and become one of the most successful photographers in the snow industry. And before we get in today's show, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen and absorb these amazing stories. I've been thinking a lot about why I do this and possibly why you even listen. Sure, we love stories, and I think about that a lot, but what hit me like a lightning bolt while I was walking around New York City with my son just a couple weeks ago. And isn't that the way all epiphanies happen? Never at the desk or when the notebook is open and pen in hand, but strolling around and trying to explain to my son why swatches, yes, the watch, were once cool and why they're now cool again. But it hit me that stories have the power to locate ourselves in someone else's story. And that in itself creates empathy. This idea that they are like me. And what that allows is for us to change our mind. And when we change our mind, we change the world. Or another way to put it is, change the world, change your mind. But the only way we can really change long-held beliefs and ideas is to hear and relate to the stories of others in our office, town, country, and the world. Change our minds, and we change the world. Now that's the power of stories and storytelling. Hey, and if you like and enjoy the show, please take a minute or two to rate and review us over at iTunes. iTunes uses these as part of the algorithm that determines ratings on the Apple charts. And ratings help us to build an audience, which then helps us to continue to produce this show. And lastly, this show is all about creating value for you, as well as opening up a dialogue. I realize I'm doing all the talking, but please, let's start the conversation. I am at Mark Gutman, MarcGutman, on all social media channels. And you can always send an email to podcast@wildstory.com with your thoughts and comments. We read and respond to everyone. And if you have any great ideas for guests, please let me know. All your suggestions are welcome. I really want to know who you'd like me to interview next. Today's guest is Mike Arzt. You may not know his name, but if you like snow, skiing, and snowboarding, then you've most likely seen some of his photographs. He shot images for brands like Burton, Aspen, Spyder, Helly Hansen, CMH Heli Skiing, Warren Miller, Transworld, Avalon River Cruisers, Levi's, Jeep, Airstream, and the list is just too long to mention. And this episode is a special one for me because I consider Mike Arzt one of my very best friends. I feel lucky that at this stage of my life that I've been able to find a friend like Mike. And I remember the day we met several years ago. It was at his co-working space in Denver called Battery 621. We were hosting an entrepreneur organization event, just a simple lunch and learn where we go and someone tells me about their business. And he's telling me all about his businesses, from the multimedia aspect of his company called The Public Works to the co-working space he had built at Battery 621. I thought, I want to be friends with that guy. And I also think that was the day I committed to my first heli trip. Of course, Mike, like he does to everyone, talked me into it. And Mike has that way about him, an easygoing confidence that people want to be around and trust. And since that day on the rooftop at Battery 621, we've become fast friends. We've traveled the world together. Our families have vacationed together. And now, luckily, we're even doing a little work together. And while he's been involved with some of the biggest and most recognizable brands, not just in the snow industry, but the world, you'd never know it. One of my favorite memories is I gave him a call once about something unimportant, and Mike picks up and is just chatting away. And he says, "Hey, I've got to go. I'm on a mountain in Nepal." Or was it Iceland? Or was it Canada? You know, that's just the way Mike is. He always has time for his friends, always ready to pick up a call, never too far away, even when he's halfway around the world. And the Japanese, well, they have this concept called Ikigai. That means a reason for being. And the word Ikigai is usually used to indicate the source of value in one's life or the things that make one's life worthwhile. The word translated to English roughly means thing that you live for, or the reason for which you wake up in the morning. And each individual's Ikigai is personal to them and specific to their lives, values, and beliefs. It reflects the inner self of an individual and expresses that faithfully while simultaneously creating a mental state in which the individual feels at ease. And if that's not the definition of Mike Arzt, I don't know what is. Mike is also responsible for co-founding Denver's first co-working space, Battery 621, which is more of a curated work collective than what we've come to know as a co-working space. Battery 621 was just another of those what if ideas that became a reality. Seems to happen a lot with Mike. Like, what if we rented out an entire mountain in Silverton, Colorado? What if we bought out a heli lodge in Canada? What if we took 50 of the coolest couples to Europe and took over a river cruise? What if? What if? There are a couple of crazy what ifs in development right now, and I can't wait to see them become reality. And as you'll hear, Mike has somehow figured it out, found that magic formula of making a great living and doing the work he loves. Mike is generous, relaxed, and intense at the same time. He chases snow like he's independently wealthy and works at his job like he doesn't know where the next dollar or meal is coming from. Mike is a special person in my life, and I really cannot imagine what my life would be like without the synchronous events that somehow found us coming together. And so I'm so proud to say, and here's Mike Arzt. Well, Mike, this is truly an honor. You and I are great friends, and oddly enough, it's been really hard to sit down and do this interview because we spend so much time together, and to actually sit down and go through your story has been a challenge. And we're sitting here in an Airstream in the back of Battery 621, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the episode. But I'm going to start off by reading a quote that I know you love and seems to describe your philosophy on life. And when I say life, I mean work, your personal life, your family, all of it. The master in the art of living makes little distinction between his work and his play, his labor and his leisure, his mind and his body, his education and his recreation, his love and his religion. He hardly knows which is which. He simply pursues his vision of excellence at whatever he does, leaving others to decide whether he is working or playing. To him, he is always doing both. What does that quote mean to you?
Such a good one, right? Well, it's interesting to look at it for going forward, but also going backwards. Looking back, I feel pretty lucky that it stands true to, I think, the way Frank and I have lived and the businesses that we've built. So word for word, it's such a great quote to reflect back on often. And as you know, we have a shortened version of it hanging on the wall here at Battery, and so look at it almost daily. Above and beyond that, I think what's pretty cool is the first time I read it was in Yvon Chouinard's book, Let My People Go Surfing. So it makes so much sense coming from a guy like him. So it always makes me, think about Yvon and Patagonia also. And then I think the other interesting thing with that quote is it's really no one knows who first wrote it, if you look at the history of it. So it's interesting that it's such a good piece of work, but it's pretty unknown who the original author was.
Yeah, and it's universal. And the reason I decided to open with that is I feel that it describes you quite well. And as we get into this a little bit today, you have built a life and a career around the things that you love. And a lot of times I think people that don't know you, or even that do know you, will say that you're in constant state of play. Although we both know that you're also consistently working hard. And sometimes it's hard to tell what's going on. And to me and to a lot of people, you're always doing both. And so when you think back to when you were a child, when you were young, I mean, was this always a goal for you to have this life and career where you were working, playing, doing both at any given moment?
I guess it was always a goal, but it would have been hard to really fathom how possible it could become. I grew up with my dad being an entrepreneur and co-owning a private independent pharmacy in Connecticut. And my mom helped him too, and did a mix of other things, but she was involved with the business also. So I grew up watching my dad work his ass off, and somehow also finding a ton of time to always have to take us skiing and wakeboarding and all sorts of stuff. So I saw him do it through super, super hard work. I think what we've created kind of blurs the lines a little bit more, but it doesn't come without a ton of work and stress. You just don't usually put that on Instagram so much.
So you talk about your dad and he being an entrepreneur and some of the values that he instilled at you at a young age, and growing up in Connecticut, and Connecticut isn't really the hotbed of snowboarding, for one thing, but you managed to even find joy and love for snowboarding in Connecticut. I mean, what were those early years like for you growing up in Connecticut? And maybe the best place to start is, why don't you tell me like the first time you saw a snowboard?
We grew up skiing at Stratton in Vermont the most. And, Burton Snowboard started just down the road. So Stratton and Bromley really were kind of some of the earliest mountains on the East Coast to start allowing snowboarding. So it was some of those early days, probably, 1986, 1987, starting to see boards on the mountain. I think as soon as I did, then I, just started looking, saving, shopping, and I knew it was going to be Burton. And I hung my skis up at that point when I was 12.
And so what about it? Like when you saw it, like why were you drawn to that? Why not just say, hey, those guys are a bunch of knuckle draggers, not for me. I'm going to continue skiing. What really like drew you to it and excited you? And what was that feeling when you said, you know what, I'm going to learn to do this?
I don't even remember thinking twice about it. I think just saw it and wanted to do it, and, saved up and bought that first board. And I remember more the first day going to Stratton and trying to snowboard than maybe the decision to get that board. But the first day, you still had to be certified at that point. So you had to pass a test, and then they'd give you a photo ID that actually let you on the chairlifts. And showed up that first day so gung-ho and, you'd seen people do it or seen, looking in the Burton catalogs or magazines, no internet at that time. But just showing up to Stratton that first day with like an Elite 150 and some Timberland work boots on, having to hike up and then proceeded to just get pounded. It was so hard. Somehow my buddy and I managed to pass the certification. And I remember the guy saying, all right, you're all doing pretty good. Just don't get on the chair and go right to the top. And, of course, that's what we did. And then took a pounding the whole way down and hasn't stopped since.
Yeah, and I remember those first days of snowboarding too. And it was like, it hurt and it was scary and it was hard. And there wasn't a lot of people around to even tell you what to do, like, and to teach you. Why do you think you kept going? I mean, because so many people, I know a lot of people at that point in time that were like, this is crazy. Because it was kind of kook town a little bit, right? Like it wasn't totally, mainstream. Like you said, you had to get certified. I mean, even the ski resorts were pretty much scared of snowboarders. It was hard to get snowboarding allowed on the mountain. Like, why did you keep going?
Well, I had a couple of buddies from Vernon, Connecticut who joined in at the same time. We could take the boards to even our small hill at the middle school in our town or build a jump in the front yard. And I don't know, somehow I never got that into skateboarding when I was younger, but the snowboarding really clicked. And then it was wakeboarding. I think wakeboarding was kind of happening around the same time. Let's see, surfing. Probably started surfing after that. But, I think we just had a couple of buddies and we just stuck with it. I think the only time I went back to skis was, I think, coming out to Colorado with my dad, and we went, one of the places we went wasn't allowing snowboarding at that time. And until several years ago, I had never been back on skis again. So I don't know. I don't remember ever questioning it. I remember just getting so beat up and hitting my tailbone so hard on ice a few times. Like, I can remember going into 8th grade and having to ease my ass into a chair because it hurt so bad, but never really thought about giving it up.
Yeah, there's those pounds on the backside when you catch an edge. It almost feels like you're just gonna, I don't know the eloquent way to say it, that you're just gonna like crap yourself, that it hurts so bad and you don't know what happened, and it happens so quick. It's just like boom.
I can remember one flash of light and crash under a chairlift at Waterville Valley in New Hampshire that I still think I'm hurting from that one. On long motocross rides, I can still feel it in my tailbone. But the boards, everything was just harder then. The boards were concave, Elite 150, like short tail, barely had steel edges at that point. And, they were fine in powder, but when it came to riding Stratton some days, it took a few more years before I think carving kind of came into my life.
Yeah, I had an Elite with the swallowtail and a metal fin on the bottom. I don't know if yours had that, but that was kind of like the big tech to have a fin, which now just seems hilarious.
Yeah, except maybe now the boards look closer to those Elite 150s again, but on a powder day.
Yeah, mine was great. It was fluorescent yellow with hot pink kind of splashes on it.
Same board.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and I had Sorels. I didn't have Timberlands, but Sorels with like Fast Tech buckles across the front, and wasn't too responsive. I'll tell you that. Cool. Well, let's keep talking about your early years in Connecticut. So what was that like? So, you mentioned your dad, he was an entrepreneur and had a pharmacy, and you're growing up and you get interested in snowboarding, but you're living in Connecticut. So like, how often are you going to the mountain?
We got up quite a bit. My dad was committed and still is committed. I mean, he might be getting more days on snow now than I do. He loves skiing. So we went quite a bit. Once I could start driving, I was going as much as I could on my own, kind of brokered a deal with my parents that if I maintained a B average, they let me miss a day of school a week to go up to Stratton, which ironically, I probably did a lot better in school by missing 45 days my senior year. So there was a lot of that going on. I was also trying to do every possible thing I could to try to figure out how to ride more and kind of get around the cost of either the equipment or the lift tickets. A buddy of mine and I started the Rockville High School Surf and Snowboard Club, which was such a joke, but it enabled us to go to a local ski shop and kind of broker a deal. We definitely took care of ourselves a little bit better, I think, but it worked out for everyone. I think everyone else in the club got like 15% off at the store, but we got 50% off. And we also, through that, we'd, call up ahead of time and set up group tickets at Stratton and save money that way. But getting into that ski shop kind of via the angle of the Surf and Snowboard Club. I also started stalking the store owner quite a bit, Neil Ryan of Ryan Ski and Sport in East Hartford, Connecticut, no longer around. But I just harassed Neil and harassed him until he finally hired me. And so I guess that was my first official paycheck from the ski and snowboard industry. And I believe that was my junior year of high school. Through the shop, it helped me with gear. He kind of sponsored me a bit too. So he helped me out with some stuff. That also helped with lift tickets through the shop, getting free passes. So that was sort of the big first step in forcing my way into the snowboard industry.
Yeah, and I love the ski and was it the ski and snowboard club? I feel like things haven't changed that much. You and I just ran a trip to Silverton Mountain with 60 plus adults. And part of that was, finding a way that we could all go with our friends and making that happen and not too different from probably what you were doing in high school there. When you were pushing so hard, when you were like, asking your parents, and I think your mother contends that maybe she didn't let you take a day off and doesn't remember that, but maybe I just don't think she wants to be judged on the podcast airwaves as being a bad parent. But what was driving that? What was that in service of? Why were you so, hell bent on getting up to the mountain, 45 days a year? I mean, did you think you were going to have a career in this, or was it just because you just loved being on the mountain so much?
I think this is that part of, do you even call snowboarding a sport? Or, people are as passionate about hunting or so many things, right, that are hard to explain to other people how it drives you that much. I sat through middle school and high school just sketching snowboarders and Burton logos on everything and just watching the videos. It was all consuming. And then it just kept building from there. My parents let me go to a weekend camp at Stratton that a bunch of the pro snowboarders put on at that time. It was the first, Jake Burton came and visited the camp. That was the first time I met Jake. And it was one thing after another like that. I think early on too that, Jake was more of my hero than say Craig Kelly or some of the athletes at the time. I think I was drawn to the entrepreneurial and the business side of things. So that just kept growing over time between getting to meet some of those guys in the ski shop and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's super interesting about Jake and Burton. And so from a very early age, I just kind of want to digress and have a little brand conversation. The Burton brand really spoke to you, and it really said something. And for lack of better word, it was your tribe, and you set out to join that tribe and be a part of it. What was it about Burton specifically? Because there were other brands at that time, right, that were coming up and doing things. What about Burton was so compelling to you?
There were other brands at the time, probably Sims and Barfoot were standing out the most. But on the East Coast, I think Burton just owned it. It was probably plus being at Stratton, everyone I was probably seeing in those early days riding and riding well were probably all Burton employees and probably some of the people that I got to go work with later on. So Burton just, I think, owned that zone. They had their factory in the time, I better not mess this up now, but in Londonderry, Vermont, just down the road from Stratton. But, early, I can remember the beginning of each season just calling the showroom. And you call the showroom and you're like, are the new boards out? And the new board's out. And it was Emmett, who I went on to work for later, and Mike Lavecchia running the shop. And I bet they probably were getting harassed by 1,000 kids like me. But as soon as the new gear would come out, I'd road trip up with my parents, September, October, whatever, go to the factory, check out everything new, talk to those guys. And you're kind of right there where the stuff's being built. So I had this early connection to Burton, and it only grew stronger because of the local presence and the strong presence.
Yeah, and so you're in high school, you're getting some decent grades because snowboarding's fueling your attention level, and you're getting out on the hill, you're making some connections with Burton. But at this point, it sounds like, you have some buddies at Burton, you have, the job with Neil Ryan, if I got that right. And take me from there. What's going on? So
the first year at Ryan Ski and Sport, I remember my first day at work showing up. I was psyched, go after high school, drive my Pontiac Sunbird over to East Hartford. And I think I spent the whole day I just got put in the back room and they're like, all right, all these ski poles came in. They all need baskets on them. And I remember that being my first day in the ski shop. And I was psyched about it. But I just slowly tried to chisel my way out of the back room. And what would happen is I'd hear someone come into the shop and ask about snowboards. And I could hear all the ski guys. They did a good job. But eventually I'd kind of wiggle my way out. And if there was a snowboard customer, I'd end up talking to them. Then they started to allow me out of the back a little bit more to handle that. But by the end of the year, Neil took me to my first trade show. It was like a regional show. It might have been in Providence or Rhode Island. I don't really even remember. But he gave me a budget and told me, to figure out the snowboard buy for the year. And I sat with Tim Sternberg, who was the Burton rep at the time. And, it's the rep's job to really help figure out the right mix for the shop. So Tim's a good guy. I'm sure he did most of the heavy lifting, but I got to be part of it. And actually, when we were just planning the Silverton trip, reconnected with Tim. And at that time, he told me that I was the only buyer he ever dealt with that was still in high school, which was kind of a cool thing to hear all these years later.
Yeah. So how old were you?
That was probably I want to say it might have been my senior year in high school, but it was still high school.
Yeah. And what was the budget you were given? Do you remember?
I feel like it was $100,000 or something like that.
I mean, that's crazy. I couldn't even imagine being given $100,000 in high school and given the responsibility. I mean, did that phase you at all? Or were you thinking this is crazy, or do you just kind of fit right into that role?
I mean, it's a blur at this point, but I think why it's not that hard is because you sit with a guy like Tim. He knows what the shop bought the year before. We know what's still on hand. And from there, you're figuring out the new assortment from Burton and what stuff looks like it's going to work well for the customers of that store. So I don't remember it being that hard. I do remember it being fun to go around and look at some other brands and pick up 5 boards from a different company and 5 boards here because, we didn't want just Burton, though at that time it was probably 80 or 90% of the order. But no, Tim was so good. And so Tim really became a serious mentor to me at the beginning. He started inviting me to go to on snow demos and, we'd go and turn screws and help out at those things. He took me on a trip up to Tuckerman's Ravine, which is a kind of a hike in backcountry zone in New Hampshire, classic backcountry ski zone. And, Tim took me up there and we ended up being with some of the biggest kind of the big wigs of Burton at that time, like the head of design. Jake was also on that trip. I just found some video footage and put a little thing together. We'll have to put a link into the podcast from that trip. But I don't know, the several guys that were up there are, most of them are still super powerful forces in the industry. Paul Marovitz was there, who went on to start Rome Snowboards. And so Tim really took me under his wing and he helped open a lot of doors for me.
Yeah, and so you mentioned something else, and so let's kind of rewind a little bit and go back, because I believe that while you're developing this passion for snowboarding, you have another passion that's starting to develop and bubble up. And you mentioned that you have some video from Tuckerman's, and so you're in high school and you're taking video, and so that's what your profession is today, and video, photography, stills, and shooting a lot of snow sports and as well as some other things. When did the interest, at least in photography, start?
I tried to think about all of this stuff quite a bit coming into this podcast, and also recently did one with Mark Sullivan for the Snowboard Project. It's a great other podcast series. And what hit me is the sort of the trifecta in my life has been photography, kind of entrepreneurial business, and travel. And those 3 things all seem to go back as far as I can remember. My dad was really into shooting photos. He had a lot of gear. He shot through high school himself. So when I started getting into that in high school, we built a darkroom at home. So that's around the same time I was really getting heavily into snowboarding. I was also shooting a lot, and we'd go up to Stratton. I'd shoot. I'd get home. I'd process film in my basement and print photos and take them to my buddies the next day. And also that desire to go further and find better mountains and cool places and deeper snow, all of that started around then. And somehow I've been lucky that it's still, all three of those things are a big part of my life.
Yeah. And so, now it's really common, and we try to find what our calling is or what we're meant to do, as we kind of do the Venn diagram of like, all right, I like photography and I like snow sports and I like travel and it all overlaps. What can I do? And we then go off and decide to do something or invent a career or whatever. But back then, were you even thinking like this, or were you just doing this stuff organically because you loved it and it was just fitting in naturally? Or did you have an eye? I mean, because you've mentioned several times that the entrepreneurs in your life were really this guiding light, this thing that intrigued you. And so you were at least aware of that at the time. And it even sounds like, back with, Neil at the shop, I mean, there's all this entrepreneurial activity. So are you thinking, hey, I can take these three things and make it? Or is it just like, hey, I'm going to chase this stuff for, the best I can and see what happens?
It definitely came in segments. And I think the first major thing was, I don't know why I can't remember the name of this snowboard film that Burton put out, but a bunch of it was shot in New Zealand. I must have seen it my sophomore year, because it's all I could think about were these shots from New Zealand of, the riders up on the snow and looking down into these lush green valleys with blue lakes. And so around that time, sophomore year, my best friend and I started saving money and kind of said, we're going to Australia and New Zealand right when we graduate. And I'm sure a lot of people didn't expect us to actually do that, but I saved 10% in those early days. I was working at TCBY Yogurt. So I was putting like 10% of every paycheck I opened a separate savings account. I can remember, doing the math and putting like $18 at a time in. But we graduated and we left. And when all our friends were heading off to college, we left with just backpacks and landed in Cairns, Australia. And without even bullshitting, we walked out to the highway and decided whether to go north or south. We had zero plan, and we were in probably super over our head. So that really lit off the travel part. I came back from going down the coast of Australia and New Zealand on that trip, went back to Ryan Ski and Sport for the Connecticut winter, saved up again, and then went back to New Zealand in June, July, August, and spent those months down there snowboarding. And it was that year I took off after high school. I was still working at Ryan's. I traveled twice to New Zealand. Tim was still really involving me in a bunch of stuff. It was during that year of travel where I decided that my number one focus was to go work for Burton. And so I was pursuing that, and I also applied to University of Vermont for business school, since it was right in the same place. And it was really the chase of working for Burton that led me to UVM for business school. So it kind of went snowboarding, travel, then more business school, getting the job at Burton, and photography didn't come into it for quite a while after that.
Yeah, and as a interesting point, I also worked at TCBY. I think at probably the exact same time, or
so did my wife.
A lot of TCBYers in our realm. And mine was in Troy, Michigan, and it was great. And I remember hooking all my friends up with massive servings of froyo, and then looking to the person who was behind them, getting their serving that was a tenth the size with the frowny face.
I still have trouble paying for frozen yogurt.
Yeah, it was serious currency back in high school. We traded also with the dudes that worked at Wendy's. We'd have a good barter system going. And that's one thing that we might be able to talk about too, is your take on bartering, because I know you've learned the art of bartering quite well. But so here you are, you kind of fast forwarded though, I'm thinking, so were your parents at all saying, Mike, what's going on? Or are you going to do anything? Or were they just totally supportive? You're happy working at the snowboard store and we don't know what's happening. I know my parents, they were pretty mellow, but they had a plan for me, right? They were you're going to go to school and you're going to do this.
I always should call my mom and ask her. I'm not sure what her take would be at this point in time, but when I decided to take the year off after high school, the one thing they asked me to do was have a backup plan. So I did apply to University of Utah at that time and got accepted. And that was a backup plan. But I think they saw that I was working really hard and chasing stuff and maybe just didn't know exactly what. They were very supportive in me taking the year off, which, I'm really thankful that they were, because if I'd gone straight to college after high school, I don't think I would have been as put together and as focused as I was after not only just traveling on my own for a year, but having that time to really think about what I wanted to do, which in my head became like 100% clear that I wanted to go to Vermont and work for Burton. So that time helped me out a bunch. I think by the time I got through that year, yeah, they saw that I was just, chasing UVM and working too. So I'm sure they were more worried than they ever maybe let me see. I think I'd be a lot more stressed as a parent looking back at myself than they appeared to be at that time.
Yeah, and my guess is too that, knowing you, that you have this like crazy strong work ethic. And I'm sure they saw that, whether it was, working at the shop or going on adventures or even following your, passion or hobby of photography and video, right? That you'd come back and you just work. I mean, that's one thing I've always personally admired about you is you just have this like, everyone thinks you're off just playing or chasing powder, and that is half the story. That is true. That's not a false fact, but there is this side of you that's like this insane work ethic and, really committed to getting things done and also honoring your work commitments, which is always, you never go chase snow or go chase an adventure at the risk of like not honoring a work commitment. And so did they sense that? Do you know where that even came from? Was that something that, you got from your father?
I think there's probably some extra chromosome in my German background, but I saw it in my grandfather. He wasn't a guy who ever just sat around. Even when he was retired, he had a cottage on a lake, and we'd go there and he'd be under the cottage digging out the foundation by hand and rebuilding the pillars or whatever. I never saw him just kick back and sit still. My dad was always the same way, and I don't know if that's learned or, genetics or whatever, but I can see it in my kids now. So I think it's passed along. Like the work ethic is, maybe it's passed and maybe it's also sort of demanded and expected, right? I mean, you can look at certain cultures, like whatever, you can joke, right? But I mean, most of the time you meet like someone who's South Korean and they'll tell you their parents were like never going to let them not be completely successful. So maybe we had a bit of that too.
Yeah. And so you're on this path to success and you're at UVM, and I just imagine you're going to class and not snowboarding. And what are you doing? So like, how did you get to Burton, and how did that all shape up?
Once again, I think I always seem to do better when I'm a bit overloaded. So I started at UVM going to business school at the same time I was working at Burton, and they have a retail showroom, which was super helpful for me because it was open 8 to 8, 7 days a week. So I worked pretty close to full time in the shop and carried a full class load, which I would stack on like say Tuesdays or Thursdays, whatever I could do to make it possible to work. But I was probably also snowboarding, 3-4 days a week. So it was nonstop. One of the great things working at Burton, even being considered a part-time employee, was our passes were provided. So getting a pass to stow at that time, I mean, it probably meant so much more to me as a college student than if you're, full-time making a full salary at Burton. So some of those benefits were super helpful to me. So we were riding Sugarbush and Stowe all the time. I lucked out and had a roommate freshman year too, who was also super into riding. I guess a lot of people at UVM are. Like, it was never that hard to find people to go charge to the mountain for half a day or whatever. So it helped me to kind of maybe stay out of as much trouble as maybe I would have got into, to be that busy. I know when it would get towards the end of the school year, Burton would slow down. Maybe I wasn't working. I felt like the more free time I had, the more I screwed off and had a harder time staying focused on school. So it was a nice combo. And somewhere in the first couple of years, I got a promotion to being the assistant manager of the showroom. And then my senior year in college, I took a promotion to being the global sales and marketing manager for Red, which is a whole category of the helmets and accessories and everything for Burton. So it was cool. That was my senior year. I missed walking in graduation because I was presenting to Burton's global sales force in Austria. And it ended up taking me, another 5 or 6 years to finish my last 2 classes from UVM. that was one thing my parents did push me on. I think I was down to one last class, and I heard a lot of like, could you please just get that diploma? And me saying like, hasn't really gotten my way yet that I don't have it.
That's so great. And it's like, I want to point out, to me, it sounds like too, that you weren't working because you had to. You were really working because you wanted to. I mean, there was something, were you paying your own way through school, or was working at Burton really this like extension of aspiration and just the pure love of the sport and attaining the goal that you had set, so many years before?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I was very lucky that my parents were, covering the majority of the school costs. Because I was working, I was able to have a car up at UVM even as a freshman. So I was working hard to cover a lot of my own expenses. My Pontiac Sunbird died that first year, and I remember leasing a Volkswagen Jetta, I think my freshman year, and that seemed like a huge decision. I can still remember that $299 payment per month, and insurance and all that other kind of stuff, and gas getting back and forth to the mountain. So I was working really hard for financial reasons, but mostly for the more fun side. I mean, I feel for people that have a lot of school debt and that kind of thing. And I was very lucky that my parents were able to take care of that part for me.
Well, and you kind of, glossed over probably like 3 or 4 years there, maybe 3 years, but you started working in the retail showroom, and that was the flagship showroom. That's where, that was the place to be in retail at Burton. You work your way up. Like, how do you all of a sudden were you a junior or senior in college when you started working at Red?
Senior year, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you all of a sudden get this opportunity to head up a product line at Burton?
Burton at that time, maybe there were 300 people. Burton had moved up to Burlington, Vermont. And so, it's like a bigger company, but at the same time, most people. Working in the store was awesome because it was very expected that we were, the eyes and ears of the whole company. We're just down the hall from all the people designing the product, salespeople, customer service, dealer service. It was such a great, tight-knit company that we'd have people road trip in from so far away, like I used to as a kid. People come from Canada, people come from far away to come visit Burton. And we would pick up on a lot of that data and pass it on to all the product managers. And so there was a lot of actual, business related reasons that we got to know other people in the company, but you're also snowboarding with everyone, going to parties with everyone. That place was like family there. So by the time that opportunity came along, I think like a lot of good companies, they look internal too. So when that opportunity came up, it got spread around internally, and I think my name got put into the mix.
That's so great. And so you're working on that project. Did you get over your skis at all on that one? It seems like a really big responsibility and a really big job for someone who doesn't sound like they had a whole lot of like real experience in managing a product.
Yeah. You think business school would have you all sorts of ready for everything, but I give Burton so much credit for my education, and I think UVM helped supplement that. I took that job for Red, and how it was explained to me and what became the reality of what was needed out of that position were two very different things. I think what was explained to me to be the person out in the field, working with the pro athletes and working with snowboard camps and all that kind of stuff. I had that, but the part that was, dealing with like global forecasts and orders and dealing with inventory that hadn't sold and where's that going to go? The bigger side of the job, I was way over the front of my snowboard.
And then so what happened?
Yeah, I think I basically got like the old sit down that things just weren't working out quite well enough. And that, a great guy by the name of Chris Mask was being brought in to kind of take that over. And Chris was awesome, veteran industry guy. He was in early with Original Sin snowboards that I think he helped build that whole company, and most people don't even probably know that brand anymore. But Chris came in and took over, and that was sort of the end of my time with Red, though I didn't really have a next plan presented to me, or I didn't know what I was going to do. So
you're like freaking out? Like, cause I mean, you're in like, you ascended to this amazing position. I'm sure that you were like, holy crap, I am the shit, right? Like I'm managing a product. I'm kind of hitting everything. I'm young. I'm in this great position. And I've had this happen myself before where it's like, bam, a little humbling experience. I mean, what are you thinking at that moment?
It's such a mix of stress and disappointment, and I definitely had some, resentment towards Burton for a bit of just, where am I going now, and is this sort of the end of this time? Since I was 12, that's all I could think about. I think at that time I was probably 21, and it hurt, and I really didn't know what was going to happen next. I was listening to what was available at Burton, and not a lot was coming up. And I started looking elsewhere too. And Allison and I were together at that time too. So she heard me go through a bit of it, and we thought about, do we go to Colorado? Where do we go next? But I really wish I could remember how long it was that I sort of sat in the, I don't even know what you call it, the doldrums there of, I'd go to work at Burton, but I really had no job. And I just kind of sit there and try to figure out what I was going to do next. Or if they were going to just ask me not to come back someday.
That's so great. Just keep showing up until they tell you not to. So then
it's like Office Space, right?
Put you in the basement with the stapler. So then how'd you get out of that? What happened?
Well, I'm glad you got to meet Maddie Swanson at Silverton, because I love that there's just certain people and random things that happen in life that completely change your course. And I was at a party one night, bunch of us from Burton, and I think I was just talking to Maddie and told him that I figured I was out of there, that the jobs I had heard that might be available were not appealing at all, and just explaining to Maddie that I was probably going to move on and look for something else. And he was just so calm, and he just said to me, like, just give it a couple days. And sure enough, he left. He went to Oakley, and Maddie had this awesome job that was created basically to travel with Terrier, who was, by far the Michael Jordan of snowboarding. And so Maddie's job was created just to be where Terrier was, and to just be there and help him in any possible way he could. So Maddie left, and I got that job. And when I got that job, it was 1998, thereabouts, because it was the first year that snowboarding was going to the Olympics. So my position of traveling with the team, it became less focused just about Terrier, and more about the half pipe riders and the athletes that were competing to go to the first Olympics in Nagano in 1998. And yeah, thank you, Maddie, for quitting and going to Oakley and remaining a great friend to this day, because who the hell knows what would have happened if he hadn't left.
Yeah, and you were working with one of our former guests we've had on the show, Ross Powers, and he was also there, and one of the riders. And, so you've spun out of this like awful situation, washed up at 21, right? And life's over. And you've all of a sudden find yourself traveling the world with, the Michael Jordan Terrier of snowboarding. You're working with Ross. I mean, like, this is crazy. And like, how are you providing value to them at the time? I mean, what was your mindset, and what are you trying to do to be a part of the team?
So when I switched that job, it was under JG, John Gert, who's he's worked at Burton probably about as long as anyone. Maybe, I don't know, maybe only Jake has more seniority at this time. JG was, head board tester and just amazing, knows more about snowboarding than just about anyone else. So I went in working under JG in hard goods, and my role was really to provide the best service possible to the pro athletes, while also filtering all that information and data from what was happening out on the mountain back to Burton. So it had some similarities to my time in the showroom, except now I got to be out all over the world with the athletes. And I mean, who even knew a job like that existed? And it really didn't. I lucked out that it was somewhat created, and I was in the right time, right place. And, I'd like to think I worked hard, and, had a reputation at Burton too. But I approached that job as just, I'm going to be the best possible at this. And JG taught me a ton about boards, tuning, whatever. Chris Mask, it was so awesome that he was there, and he was, Red was all the tuning stuff. So, I mean, he knocked me out of my previous position, but he also became my mentor he was such an amazing board tuner, and super tech guy. A guy, Chris Doyle at Burton at the time too. Also, he'd come from Grindrite, so he'd come from the tuning side of things. All these people I just tried to absorb every ounce of what I could learn from them. And when I traveled, I carried so much stuff, but it was tools, extra parts, extra boards. And when we were at any of these events, my goal was always to be the first one out and the last one up there. And I wanted the athletes I just wanted them to always know that I was there and that I was helping them to be better. And if they had an issue, that we could handle it quickly. And yeah, it was awesome. And a lot of stuff at that time broke. I mean, it was like pit crew. Someone would break a binding midway down a run at X Games or something like that. And I would usually know, like, you could see what happened or whatever. And by the time they got to the top, we'd have stuff ready and I'd swap it out. And yeah, it was good times.
Yeah. And when you say athletes, I mean, it wasn't just your athletes, right? You were helping to support anyone that had a binding issue or something of that nature.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the goal was definitely to take care of the Burton athletes the most, but at that time, the majority of people were riding in Burton bindings, boards and other stuff varied a lot, but most people were riding in Burton bindings. So we were fixing stuff for all sorts of people. And there were some awesome riders out there too that were, just pushing the sport, and super nice people. And when someone like Barrett Chrissy asks you if you can help her out with her board a bit, like, not saying no.
Such a nice guy. Everything for the sport. So, which leads me to think, like, here you are. Like, was there any point where you thought that you'd be a professional rider?
No.
No, and why? flat out no. And why? At what point? I mean, you had to at least at some point think that there was something in terms of riding, maybe in high school or as you were, progressing. But you seem very comfortable, and I think that a lot of people could also see. You could also tell the story that you got this job as basically carry all the crap up the hill, be the ski valet, but you really embraced it and saw it as a position where you could add a ton of value and be a part of the team. And I really am drawn to this idea of like, hey, I don't care what the job is, I'm just going to be the best at that, whatever that is. And so you were just happy to be a part of the team, or there was no point that you ever wanted to be on the snow?
In high school, I raced a bit, and Neil Ryan helped me out. I think like sponsorship meant that he gave me a jacket that we put the Ryan's Ski and Sport logo on. I think I might still have it. I hope I do. And I think he listed me as a full-time employee so I could get free ski passes. It really didn't cost him much. But, I'd go up Stratton or whatever, and if there was a race, you'd maybe get to check out the course, and then you'd wait and take your run, and then wait and take a run. I hated that part. If I was going to drive 2.5 hours up to Vermont, I just wanted to ride. And, the few races I did, it's not like I was in the top 10 or whatever. In the freestyle side of things, I was never on track to be a professional athlete. On the freestyle side of things, if free riding even existed at that time, I don't know, maybe I would have chased it a bit harder. But I just think I learned early on by going down the working path in the industry, I got to have a lot of the same benefits that the professional riders were kind of living and getting, but on a different track. So I was getting to travel with those guys, but my own way of doing it, and probably riding more. I ran all the summer operations for Burton a couple summers at Hood, and those years, I think it was probably 2 or 3 years, I was probably on mountain 200 days a year. So yeah, it always worked for me to go the working path. And I think the duration of ability to do that is a bit longer than being a pro rider too. Yeah.
And so you're at Nagano. What was that position called again?
My job?
Yeah.
I don't know. It might have been team technician, or I don't know if it was team coordinator. I felt lucky that it wasn't team manager at that time. There were some great people doing that, Vin and Bruno, and that's a hard job because they're managing the careers of people that are maybe only 16 or 17 years old and having to make hard decisions, like cutting people or signing other people. For those 3 years at Burton, I was lucky. I was just out there purely to help, and I didn't ever have to be the bad guy. It was nice.
It's a good position to be in. And so you did that for a while. And when did that come to an end, and why?
So I think I did about 3 full seasons, and it was a really hard decision to leave. A couple different things led to it. The job had changed a bit. It had shifted into the marketing department from hard goods. I was no longer working for JG, and I'll just say that it wasn't the same. Working for G was all time. So there was some maybe non-alignment with my new boss. I started shooting a lot more. I was going on all the big Burton photo shoots, helping with gear and stuff. But I started taking my camera and shooting more. And some of the pro photographers at the time started giving me really nice props on the stuff I shared with them and showed them. And at the same time, the internet started becoming much more prevalent. So while I was traveling for Burton, I was able to capture photos and write stories, and I was freelancing that for some of the different online entities. So the whole mix of those things, and I started really thinking about leaving Burton for a while, but then I got a job offer from a multimedia company out in Irvine, California, and I finally just took a big chance and took that job and left Burton with a big fear that I was walking away from maybe the best job I'd ever had in my life. But packed up and went to Irvine.
And we'll get to that in a second. But how did you know that was the right decision? I mean, you just alluded to it. Ever since you were 12, you had your sights on Burton. You're doing, amazing things. You have this opportunity with the Red Line. You are, traveling as a team tech all around the world, going to the Olympics, doing these things that I'm sure that you probably never even thought were possible. And it's like your first family. It's something that, how do you know it's the right time to leave? Because I imagine that had to be really, really difficult.
Should have journaled more at the time. I don't know. I think 20 years and a couple of head injuries and some malted beverages have happened between now and then. But, I know it was a hard decision, and I felt like it took me well over a year to make the decision to leave. It was a combo that I was losing a little bit of my total stoke for the job and for Burton, just some of those challenges I was having with what the job had turned into. And I think you've heard me say this before, but I read the book The Alchemist, like, I don't even know, 3-4 times in a row. And I don't know, something just finally clicked. And I think part of it was that entrepreneurial spirit. It was really hitting me that I felt like if I didn't make a move and walk away at that point, that I probably would have stayed forever and probably tried to climb the ladder at Burton, which would have been interesting also, because so it was really hard. I wasn't in a bad position by any means. I definitely had that thought of, I'm basically just traveling and having a blast. I mean, I was probably growing up a little bit, and it just seemed like it was time to take this opportunity. A big part, I think, was because it was a media company. It was going to give me that chance to, at that point, get more serious about the photo video side of things. That helped a lot.
Yeah, and you kind of glossed over that a little bit, that, you had this opportunity at Burton. I mean, do you remember any of the photographers there that were giving, or one in particular that was giving you props, or that really gave you the confidence that maybe you could add this to part of your profession?
Those Burton shoots, and they probably still are, I don't know all the details anymore, but the Burton shoots at that time were legendary. The best filmers in the world, the best photographers. So Jeff Curtis and Dean Blotto Gray, Mark Gallup, Trevor Graves. I mean, all these guys are still just total legends in the sport. So I got to be up on the hill and watch them work. And I seem to remember Burton would do a slideshow. I mean, at this time, we were shooting film. There were no pixels. There was grains of film. But they would do a slideshow at the end, and we'd done a shoot in Chile. And a couple of my slides got pulled out and put into that slideshow. And it might have only been 4 shots or something, but to sit there and watch all this like amazing photography and have some of those guys just say, nice shot. That might have been all they said. They might have just been blowing smoke up my ass, but it had a lasting effect on me. And yeah, so that's kind of what happened.
Eddie, I mean, do you think that's the moment where you really thought like, hey, like I can add this to what I'm doing and, make a run at this as a broader career, and that's why you went to Irvine?
Well, I had my first published photo in Transworld magazine from a photo I took at the Burton Mount Hood house. Was like just ran in the little tiny type news section in the back of Transworld. It was a Japanese snowboarder doing a table dance in boxer shorts. I think I got paid $50 for it. I shot that during my time at Burton. So, I mean, that was this weird moment of someone's going to pay me anything for, taking a photo. But mostly I'd say it was getting some of the confidence that my photos and words had value and were going to use on some of the online portals, and then getting an offer from Blue Torch, which was one of those. Blue Torch was interesting because they were doing web, but also print and had TV time. So they were going after this sort of full multimedia mix, and they offered me a job as the snowboard editor. So that was a big change from being at Burton, more on the hard goods marketing, sports marketing side of things, and taking a jump more towards the media side of the industry.
Yeah. And I mean, really ahead of their time, right? I mean, it's kind of what is happening now in media, where you have to have all these, integrated channels and you're everywhere. But it sounds like Blue Torch really had that vision, much like almost like a Red Bull, if you will, but way back when, right? And maybe a little bit ahead of its time.
Yeah, them and some other companies that kind of went after it. I'd be surprised if I could even remember all their names right now, but Hard Cloud, and there were a couple entities that really went for it at that time, and most of those failed. And it was the magazines more so adding a digital component that lasted a bit longer, and then ESPN has continued to grow. So some of the other media outlets really did better with it. It's sad that Transworld, it was just within the last month probably that Transworld announced that they were done. So the media keeps changing, and I'd say that I was lucky in the fact that I made that move at that time, but that job only lasted 3 months, and then we all got laid off. So I don't know, maybe it wasn't completely lucky.
Yeah. So you uproot your life, you move from, kind of where you're comfortable, where you have a great life, your dream job in Burton, you take a risk, you are all excited, you're going to conquer the world, you have a budget, you're going to become a multimedia publishing giant in the snowboard industry in 3 months, and it's over. What's that day like?
Well, there's also the getting there. Allison and I drove a U-Haul towing that same Volkswagen Jetta. Got married in Vegas so that she'd have benefits. I can really remember sort of that descent down the mountains as you go into Orange County. And I think I can diagnose it as a panic attack. I mean, I left years in Vermont and then moving into San Clemente and Orange County, and just total freak out about being in, a place with that many people and that kind of thing. So Orange County in California was always a bit of an uneasy feeling for me. So, when it ended, it was fear, but it was also a bit of a sign of relief, and just started interviewing everywhere I possibly could, and eventually ended up here in Colorado.
Yeah. And what company brought you here?
That would be Airwalk. It's cool. I interviewed for Transworld magazine at that time, and Solomon, Ride Snowboards. There was a bunch. Every interview I could chase, I did. But then I got linked up with Joe Babcock at Airwalk. Their team manager had just left, actually, to go to Burton. Small world in the snowboard industry. So I came out and interviewed with Joe and our buddy Styx and Linda Nylander. And I think they, Solomon, I had been interviewing for months, and I was just like, I was getting so frustrated. And is this ever going to end? And is this the kind of company I want to work for if they can't even make this decision? When they told me they were trying to hire, right? You get called in to interview for a position, and then 3 months later, they still haven't made a decision. Super frustrating. But Airwalk, I talked to Joe on the phone. I think I flew out 2 days later, and I think I had a job offer within a few days after that. And they not only, they met what I asked for, on the financial side, which still wasn't a ton, but it was, it was a step in the right direction at that point in my life. But they also agreed to buy me a full new camera setup. That was something I asked for, after getting burned by Blue Torch. I just felt like, I left there with kind of nothing, and I was like, I'm going to try to protect myself a little bit more on this one. But just Airwalk's commitment to, bringing me in and also kind of backing up my desires to not only be doing the sports marketing, but continuing to shoot as much as I could. I was sold and I was all in, and it was one of the best small crews of people I've ever worked with.
Yeah. And so take me back to that time. Was Airwalk cool? What was that brand? Were you stoked to go there? Was it a chance? What was the general perception of Airwalk as a brand? Because they were fairly new in snow at that time, right?
Well, no, Airwalk had some big years where they, I believe, I don't have all the stats, but I believe they outsold Burton a couple years on boots. They had some good years, and then they completely screwed it up with some bad product and whatever. Airwalk had been through some serious downs already at that point. The brand equity was, I would say, pretty low, but there was a new ownership group that had taken over the brand and the license. And they moved the company from Pennsylvania to Colorado. There's a lot of new people in place. So I was concerned. I didn't feel by any means that Airwalk was this glorious brand to go after. That part felt risky. I liked what I heard about the direction they were heading and the team and the people I met, but it was an interesting step after, working for the dominant force in the industry. I mean, Burton, had probably way more than 50% market share at that time, and Airwalk probably had, 2%.
Yeah, and what I find really interesting, and you might already articulate it this way, but even throughout your career to this point, it's all these jobs, really, you're a brand builder. And whether or not you're a team tech, whether or not you're in the retail store, you're working on a product for Red, you go to Airwalk. I mean, you're really a brand builder, but did you see yourself as that? Or did you realize that what was happening? Because in essence, that's what you were doing. And I know a lot of we can talk about maybe some of the fun projects you did at Airwalk and some of the things you did to build that brand. But did you even think in those terms that, hey, I'm a brand builder, I'm a marketer, or how did you see yourself at that time?
Airwalk was the first point in my career where I think that my impact on the brand could be classified in any way like that. At Burton, I felt more like a hardworking employee, and same with Blue Torch. There were a lot of people there. They were covering a lot of sports, so I felt like I was trying to do the best I could with the snowboard coverage. But at Airwalk, we were working with such a tight crew that all of us were. There were probably 6 of us that were 100% focused on snowboard. And then, the rest of the people at the company were working on shoes and everything else also. But for that small crew of us, there weren't super clear lines between, I'm working on product, you're not, or this is a sales issue, or we're going to have a sales meeting. Everyone was just all in. And so at that time, was the first, I think that was the first time I felt this personal ability to help shift maybe the course of a brand, just because there were less people. And at that point I was global snow sports manager or something like that. I had climbed a little bit, but it was mostly too that there were so few of us, we just had to do everything.
Yeah. And so what were some of the brand building activities that you were doing at Airwalk?
First, rebuilt the entire team because it was kind of had fallen apart when the previous team manager left. The position had been empty for about 6 months, and 6 months is a long time as far as athlete contracts and stuff go. So the first part was just, putting that team back together, and then started running photo shoots. And I didn't shoot everything myself. We hired other people too, which also helped me to keep learning from all those guys, especially Stan Evans and Tim Zimmerman. Thanks, guys. So, it was a mix of all those activities, but we started doing the catalogs ourselves and team videos and kind of everything. Making stickers and a bunch. The athletes were all super involved with me. Preston Strout and Zach Leach would come for, a couple months in the fall each year, and we'd just sit and edit videos and do the layouts of catalogs. I mean, we would just scissors and paste and like glue our ideas together and then send them to the printing partner that we had, who would then turn that into an actual catalog. So we were full hands-on with every aspect of it.
Yeah. And you're having this amazing time at Airwalk. You've met amazing people that are still in your life and are, great brand builders in their own right. And how did Airwalk come to an end?
Quickly. I guess actually it was a slow coming apart, but at that time, Airwalk was being funded by investment money, and those investors, I think, wanted more money more quickly than was happening. And so we started hearing rumors that things weren't looking great. I mean, I don't think Airwalk was self-sufficient at that time. It was still taking investment money coming in, and they were building, and there were a lot of things that were going right. But just because a business looks like it's going okay doesn't mean that it's actually making more than it's spending. And at some point, those investors decided they didn't want to put any more money in. And in one day, I think 90 of us out of maybe 100 got let go. But I wasn't there. It was kind of nice.
Yeah. What was that day like?
I was leaving for vacation with Allison. We were at the Denver airport. I got a call saying it was over. And then I called all the athletes, told them it was over. And then Allison and I left for a vacation.
Was that hard? Was it hard making those phone calls, or
yeah,
it was over?
Yeah. And we didn't know what was going on at that time. All the athletes were still on contracts with salaries, with open expenses, and I didn't have a lot of answers. And I was lucky that I got reimbursed, but the athletes, I don't think they ever saw another payment on their contracts, and any of them that had open expenses that were contractually agreed to in a contract, they never got paid back either, which still super bothers me because, if you're a 21-year-old kid just trying to travel the world and be the best snowboarder you can, and a company signs a piece of paper with you saying that you have a $10,000 travel budget, and you go and you do that work, and then to not get reimbursed on that, because Airwalk didn't, a technical legal company closed down at that point, but then a new company took over the license, and that's the way business goes. But the brand didn't die that day, but those contracts and all those obligations all did go down the drain, and a lot of other vendors and stuff got burned also. And you learn that as you get older. You see those things happen, but it was painful to see it happen to the athletes that trusted me.
Yeah, and so you're sitting at the all-you-can-eat shrimp bar on your cruise, and you're hanging out and getting some sun. I mean, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
What's the next move?
Allison had finished her second. Well, she'd already done her second degree. She had just finished her residency that she needed to do, and she got placed in New Jersey. So for that year, she'd been living in New Jersey. I was in Colorado, and she had just finished. I was back in New Jersey helping her pack up and drive back to Colorado. When we got that news, we already had our little getaway planned. So we left for that cruise with me have just gotten laid off that morning. And I'm not sure if Allison had even started looking for a job in Colorado, but we were basically just both unemployed and on a 7-day cruise. Yeah. We told ourselves, we'll figure it out. Let's have fun. Let's enjoy this. But you can't. We did, but you also are sort of like, I don't know what we're doing when we get back.
Yeah. So you ate unlimited poo-poo platters. You come back, and then what's going on then? So you got to get your butt in gear. I imagine you have expenses. I remember when, I've always been that age. It's like money runs out real fast, and getting a job's fairly paramount. Like, what are you doing to make money and to keep things going?
At that point, I started the super hustle of chasing everything. Luckily, while I was at Airwalk, I was shooting and filming a bunch and selling some of that to the athletes' other sponsors. And Airwalk knew that, and it was nice that I sort of had that ability. I was writing for the magazine some. So when Airwalk ended, luckily I had kind of my full camera kit at that point that I'd built up. And I really started reaching out to those other brands that I had relationships with and hustling some of the imagery that I had already shot and selling some of that stuff. So that's sort of a bit of like assets in the bank, right? I had been doing a lot of work with Helly Hansen because some of my airwalk athletes were also on Helly. So we really started growing our relationship a bunch. I was doing a lot of work for them. And, but I also started, I became a member of the Chamber of Commerce in Evergreen, Colorado. And I was also doing local work and, I shot some real estate stuff and I just did everything I could to hustle and try to make the commitment at that point that I wasn't going to go chase an in-house job again. I was going to try to do it all on my own.
So that was the moment that you were clear that like, hey, I'm going to be a pro photographer.
Yes, except I was also trying to broker my services quite a bit as also sports marketing and team management help. So it was a little bit of all of that. But I can remember talking to Gary at Helly Hansen and whatever I said, I think I said, hey, do you think you're going to, have the budget to buy $3,000 worth of footage off me or whatever? Because I had, mini DV tapes and I had photos on slides and I was trying to get enough confidence to go buy a Mac computer. I remember that being a big decision. Like, how can I even sell this stuff if I can't edit it and whatever? But having to go spend money to make money was also super stressful at that time. But, it was a couple of those people out there that kind of showed some commitment to wanting my services that helped me to make that next step.
Yeah. And then you get going a little bit, you have some success. And at some point you reunite with an old friend from Burton in Colorado.
Frank Phillips and I, we were super good friends back in Vermont. Frank had bought a house and I lived with him and helped him fix that house up. So even back in the Vermont time, we were talking about, we're just dreaming about every sort of different possibility of whether it was growing a business or chasing snow or just what we wanted to do. So, even though I was out in Colorado and at Airwalk for 3 years, we were talking about those things throughout that whole time. And then I was freelancing after Airwalk. Frank was done at Burton and freelancing in Vermont. And we just kept talking and talking. He'd come out with his family and visit Colorado. And luckily at a certain point, he just made the commitment. We didn't have really formal business going together, but he made the commitment to move his family to Colorado, which then gave us the ability to get more serious about chasing work together.
Yeah. And was it in Vermont or in Colorado where this idea of Hellbrook was born?
Oh, I have a date when we wrote that.
Yeah, it says 12/2/2000.
Yeah. So I wrote that first piece back in Vermont. Hellbrook is a backcountry snowboard line off of Stowe that we would, all of us from Burton, you'd go and try to be the first one up there and hike it faster and get it first. So I think we sort of wrote this sort of pledge or this statement that we always just referred to as the Hellbrook statement, I think back in Vermont. And it is pretty similar to the quote that you opened with.
Yeah, will you read it?
I think if I could give this proper history, I'd say that I probably wrote something that was barely English first draft, and then Frank made it actually something that we can read now. But it goes like this, written on December 2nd, 2000. Hellbrook has never been about a place. It's about a feeling, a philosophy, a goal, a friendship, new friendships, passion, fear, excitement, new challenges, failures that result in a desire to do better, a dream. It's about a life. It's about life and what we want out of it. Hellbrook is different to everyone, but our goal is to create an environment that helps everyone find his or her own Hellbrook. If Hellbrook is the same experience each time you go, then we have failed. Hellbrook cannot be static. Hellbrook is about getting up earlier, hiking harder and faster to get there first. You could wait for someone else to come down and tell you that it sucked, but you would never hit the major score. If you get up first, hike faster only to find out it's not good, what should you do next time? Get up first, hike harder, and drop in first. There are many people along the way that help you find Hellbrook. Some may play only a small part, but you would never find it on your own. Welcome to our Hellbrook.
Thank you. What's that mean to you?
Fuck, 20 years. Well, I think it means that Frank and I and our families have, that I think we've been able to stay true to what we set out. And I think that's through good partnerships, and it's also through being aligned on what we're trying to do and what bottom line means, and that we've always been driven by a quality of life, not, trying to have the biggest business or the biggest agency or, all those other things that come along with it, that it has been about. Yesterday I made a really hard decision yesterday morning and went snowboarding when I felt like I probably should have been doing a lot of other things, either business or family related, but that it's trying to find that balance and make sure that, life is driven by your passions and not just by kind of the pressures of the world around you.
And take me back to why did you guys even write this? Who sits and writes a pledge and works on this? What was the impetus to do that?
Yeah, I can tell you. So I'll have to show you the document sometime. I started a Word document and I've continued. It's kind of interesting, right? Because I probably started it in Windows 92 or something. I don't even know.
Green screen, right?
Yeah. But I started this Word document for a couple different reasons. One, I was just consuming business books, and I'd get through a 300-page book and feel like it distilled down to about 3 pages of really good info, but you can't sell a 3-page book, right? So I would highlight those books and then I would transcribe just the highlighted parts into this Word document. And same with Fast Company magazine and whatever else I was reading. Or if I saw a good quote, I had a quote section. And at some point, I just started adding some of my own thoughts. And this was one of the things I wrote way back whenever. It is just sort of a random thought. I think it was also because Frank and I were starting to talk about, what is this dream business? I was also working on the last class that I finally graduated, was writing a business plan, which more or less was the business plan for the Public Works and Battery 621. So it was a combination of all of those things, business planning with Frank, this kind of Word document of crib notes that I was just like, this is going to be my compiled, reflect back on document instead of 40 books. And somehow this quote, sat in that document. And we've revisited it a few times, but I think we also realized that Hellbrook probably wasn't the best name for a business. But that's the story of how this got written. December, I think I was still a bird at the time. I have to really dig into my timeline to remember exactly what happened.
Yeah, and talk about a creed or a mission statement, if you will, that stands the test of time. That really has lasted for you and Frank. And so kind of bringing it back to where you and Frank are, and you're doing some freelance work, you guys start working together. And at what point do you form this company that is now known as the Public Works?
I can't say exactly how long Frank had been in Colorado. It was probably at least a year or so. And he built a big shop at his house. We were kind of ramping up on more tools there. He was continuing to land design and engineering freelance work. I was doing a lot of photography, multimedia, and also sports marketing. And our buddy Steve Nielsen, he called us up. He was at Red Bull at the time and asked us to build this kind of Red Bull kind of premier brand piece that was going to be at a movie festival. So we designed and built that piece for Red Bull. And at that point, we weren't even the Public Works. But we just built and sold this piece to Red Bull. And then that kind of kicked off a bit more. We landed a pretty big project with Echo Mountain, which was a new kind of small terrain park mountain in Colorado. And the piece we were working on building for them was a very large park feature. I think it ended up being a 3,000-pound, more or less steel sculpture. And we also we were working on this large archway to go over a racetrack for Red Bull. I think it was those two pieces where we were finally set up the LLC and thought about getting a bit more serious. But it was nice that it was this slow build up. Frank and I are both, I'd say, pretty conservative when it comes to financial risk or that kind of stuff. So it was this really slow build up, and it was more so the client work increasing that almost forced us to get more serious about launching an actual company.
Yeah, and real quick, just give us like the real quick cliff notes on Frank. Like, who is Frank? How did you meet him? What's his role, in those projects, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so when I first met Frank, I think we knew each other a bit, but I was working at Burton. I was still, must have been my junior year in college. I was living in it was an animal house, right? I was still in with a bunch of college dudes, and they were still very much on that path. I was getting a little bit worn out on it, and I was working a lot, and I was looking for a different kind of living scenario. And someone at Burton told me, go talk to Frank. I think he just bought a house. Maybe he's got some extra space. And so we knew each other at that time, but I moved in with Frank into this probably 100-year-old house he bought in Richmond, Vermont. And then from that point on, we were snowboarding together all the time, riding dirt bikes together, fixing up his house. I just kept, most of the time I was just working to cover my rent. I was with Frank when he broke his back on a dirt bike. We kind of met our now wives around the same time. And, for a bit of time, all four of us were living together in that house in Richmond. So it's just been this long buildup. Nothing happened overnight. Frank's background is that he has a master's in engineering. So while I was a bit of just a screw off at Burton, traveling with the team and, taking care of people and running the operations at Hood, Frank was doing some really heavy lifting of CAD engineering, of new binding parts and tools, and overseeing the prototype shop at Burton, which was like a whole machine shop. So we both had this love for building stuff. We were constantly out in his garage there in Vermont. But his background in that area is much more formal.
So where does the name Public Works come from? So you and Frank get together and you decide to incorporate, and how'd you come up with the Public Works?
We kicked around a lot of different ideas. Don't have that scrap of paper if there was one. Our good buddy Chauncey Tanton was definitely in the mix. Chauncey might claim that he dropped it. I'm okay with that if he did, but we were working on, there was a series of different things, but we hit on the Public Works almost more as a sentence and a statement. This was before battery. I guess we'll get to that, but we had this strong feeling that the more we kept ourselves surrounded by the public or people, or just being out doing the things we loved, that we would be better at the stuff we were trying to create. And, a lot of that philosophy comes from Burton, where, athlete roundtables and consumer roundtables and gathering data out of Mount Hood and stuff, like that was how product got developed. And that's the same way Frank and I wanted to work. We didn't want to just, start a company and just hole ourselves away somewhere. We wanted to be, in the mix on the front lines. And so the Public Works
was born. So is Chauncey like the third Beatle?
Chauncey's just always been there. Chauncey, I'd say, was more like the Cato Kalin. Chauncey should do your podcast, because Chauncey had this amazing ability to also chase his passions. And I think I was always jealous of Chauncey because I think he did it in a much more carefree kind of way. Chauncey was a pro athlete for Burton, and so we traveled together a lot. And it's a long story, but he came to work for us. But Chauncey did this. He'd go from being beach bum to then go and get his MBA, to being a beach bum, to go work and do financial advising. And and to this day, Chauncey, he's one of those guys out there that just continues to lead a great life and be someone that you look forward to seeing the next social media post from. But he's been there a long time. He was our first building manager of Battery 621, and he lived in our garage in Orange County. And Chauncey's, I don't know if he's third Beatle. I bet there's like 25 Beatles, but he's one of them.
And so you and Frank, you're getting some projects, you're doing, working some really cool brands like Red Bull, doing some other things. Are you ever hit a point early on where you think it's not going to work?
I don't think we ever. Luckily, we kind of did the slow build, and working for great clients helps to lead to working for other great clients. And that's not just because that, us saying we worked for Red Bull. Part of it was because Red Bull was pushing really amazing projects our way that were premium, either photo shoots or design build. And it wasn't easy money. We worked our asses off for it, but we worked hard and they gave us great opportunities, which opened some doors for doing work with Aspen and a bunch of others. But, there's always challenges and you're trying to figure out growing a business and paying bills. But I think that we lucked out with such a kind of slow growth model that we didn't hit some of those same challenges that we hear some of our other entrepreneurial friends talk about, who might do a large, fundraising round and have $2 million in the bank and then, burn through it in a year and have to try to figure out how to re-raise funds, or where do you go next, and you have 30 employees. Frank and I just did a slow grind, and Ian was our third guy, and all of that was, we always grew the public works based off the pure, we're not gonna be able to do this next job unless we get some more help. So looking back, I think we were lucky that we didn't have one of those moments of, I've got to go get a second job, or are we going to pull this off? I think we just kept our heads down and kept things fairly simple and didn't get over the tip of our snowboards. Or maybe that's just me gloss coding everything now 15 years later, but that's how I remember it. You should ask Frank.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, if you can think about it, what was your most soul crushing day in those times? If you can imagine, what was that hardest day? Walk me through that one.
I think a really stressful time. We had that Helly Hansen contract for a while. It grew, and that enabled us when they asked us to expand from just overseeing snowboard to also overseeing ski. That's when we brought Ian on board. That was a nice contract, and it was a lot of work for us. Helly went through some big changes, kind of repositioning to sell, and we could tell that was going to go away, and that was really stressful. That's a big chunk of your income. We were lucky that around that time Spider was really ramping up, and that produced a new opportunity for us. And it's always been our goal to really try to diversify with our clients. Because one of my biggest fears is that we have we don't want a single client change that forces us to have to change the crew that works for us or anything of that sort. You see that with big agencies, right? All the time. Like, a big agency loses a huge client, and the next day 30 people are gone. Some other agency lands that client and hires 30 people, right? And we've kept it a bit smaller and just trying to stay diversified so that we don't have those kind of fluctuations.
Yeah. And you did a great job and have done a great job and have built an amazing company in the public works, and you've diversified into fabrication and multimedia. You even have a library furniture line called Supple. You distribute Ridgelite. There's a lot of other things, but you built this basically a multimedia and fabrication business in the public works, and focused on building brands and doing these big brand projects, but that wasn't enough. And you and Frank decided to build what is most likely Denver's first co-working space, where we're sitting right outside of Back Now behind Battery 621 in an Airstream. How did that all come about?
We had talked about something bigger than an agency, even from the beginning. I think even when we were both still working at Burton, I can remember looking at property listings in Colorado, and Frank and I and Megan and Allison all came out for Y2K to Colorado. It was like one of those things where Frank found like $99 plane tickets if we flew on Christmas Day or something. But we all came out to Colorado together. And even at that time, I can remember looking at some properties up in the mountains and thinking, we're going to do this agency thing, but on a piece of land or with more to it, more facilities. At that time, we were thinking it was going to be this, like a compound more out in the mountains where companies would come to be creative and prototype and, brand building or product building. I think as time went by, we were both living in Evergreen, and the reality of where we needed to be to do business slowly got us looking more and more into Denver. And because we built the whole public works, working out of our houses and working out of Frank's shop, it's at his house. It still blows me away how much stuff we built out of Frank's neighborhood, and that his HOA never shut us down. But we built really grassroots that way. So for years we looked at buildings in Denver and just kept looking and kept thinking. We knew we wanted something that ideally wasn't just our agency. We wanted something the bigger that could have community around it, ideally be surrounded by other like-minded creative companies. So we looked and looked, and at some point I was explaining this dream to another industry buddy that I knew, Jason Winkler, whose business was up in Jackson Hole at the time. And he told me that they were looking at making a move to Denver also, because they were kind of outgrowing their ability to run Wink Inc. out of Jackson Hole. So it was just through that one casual conversation on the phone that we all started looking at buildings together. And, one thing led to another. We bought a 30,000 square foot building.
Yeah. When was that? What was the date on that?
I think we're at 8 years right now. It was the day after Mother's Day that we closed on the building, I think 8 years ago, because I destroyed my ankle the day before on a dirt bike. That's why I can still remember. I blew my ankle up on Mother's Day, and we closed on Battery the next day.
And what was the building like at that time? Because, now it's this really cool workspace, and we'll post some pictures. It's got polished concrete floors, and it's, this really neat place that was designed to be, it's not really like your WeWork or any of these other buildings, but something more that really is about fostering collaboration and community. But I don't think it looked anything like that when you took possession of the building, did it?
No, we looked at a lot. I don't even know how many. We looked at a lot of different buildings. This one started to really stand out because Frank and I were driving down from Evergreen, and this building sits on the corner of the first intersection you really hit as you come down from the mountains. The first traffic light you hit as you get into Denver, Battery sits on the left. And we kept driving past this intersection and further into Denver. But we weren't looking at buildings this large. This building's 30,000 square feet. But this one started to, resonate with us. We'd already been talking to a bunch of other companies about this sort of dream to pull a mix of businesses together. So when we saw this building and we started walking it, the crew from Icelandic Skis came over with us. At that time, their showroom and offices were only a couple blocks away. And, you've got true believers and true friends and everything. When they walked the building with us, when the guys from Spider walked the building with us, it was bad. The place had sat empty for 7 years. There were like encampments in the basement with hypodermic needles and all sorts of nastiness. When the first time I brought Russ Rowan here from Spider, he was supposed to meet me at 3:00 or something. He was running late and said he wouldn't make it till 6 or 7. I can remember being like, oh shit. I mean, there wasn't even power in the building. I went to Home Depot and bought a couple flashlights and was worried about his first impression. I was also worried about us getting, jumped in the basement. This place, it was beat up. There was no HVAC, no power, no pipes. I think the homeless population had stripped every wire out of the place. So when we started to put the plan together, there was the purchase of the building, but we put way more than that into the actual build out. We had to cut, I think, like 40 new windows and put in stairwells and grind cement and HVAC and the amount of meetings you go through deciding where every single plug and switch is going to go. It was crazy that for us. I mean, we went from working out of Frank's garage basically to taking on this 30,000 square foot building. It was nice that, the Winklers had a mix of different skills and understanding and knew more about construction and stuff than we did. So the biggest thing is once we committed, we had signed leases from some of those tenants before we even closed. And then once we closed and we had a promised date to be ready for Spider because they were having their global sales meeting with 300 people here. The best way to get something done is by having absolutely no other choice but to get it done. That's what got us through this whole thing.
I mean, how did you think that you could even do this? I mean, get into a big real estate project and refurbish it and make a run of it. That's a pretty big vision.
Well, you know me well, and you know that I stress a lot, and I don't handle stress that well. It was one of the most daunting things that I ever thought about. I mean, for me, us four owners, we just did a conventional loan. We had to come up with 25% down of the total project cost, buying the building and the construction. So 25% of that total cost, and then we had to split that four ways. For me to even come up with that number, I mean, I rolled over my 401ks from Burton, from Airwalk, everything at that point that I'd saved. My parents helped out so that I could, pony up my quarter of the investment. But I guess even before that happened, I can remember talking to Allison about it. I was stressing out, just thinking about the whole thing, and we're starting to crunch numbers. And what if you don't have full vacancy, and you're going through every possible scenario? And I was, completely stressing out. I can remember Allison saying, just shut up already. You guys have been talking about this for 10 years. Just do it. Like, she was so much more confident about it. And she was like, just don't lose the house. And I said to her, this is all in. Like, if this goes down, we're losing the house. And Allison's always so calm. She was just like, well, that's fine. We'll just get an apartment in Denver then, and we'll figure it out. And I've never had that demeanor. It's always been much more stressful for me. But we were in over our heads, but you're surrounded by good people and people that believe in you and tenants that want it to work, and you figure it out. And a lot of people along the way teach you, and you make mistakes, and you just keep pushing through it. But sometimes if you don't know how far in over your head you are, you're maybe got a better chance of getting back out.
Totally. I think that all the time. I wish I didn't know what I know today. I'd be much more adventurous. What don't we know, or what's hard about running a co-working space like Battery?
I don't think the co-working space is necessarily the challenges. And when you want to get down to it, I think the bigger challenges are more, financing and bank loans and permits and city stuff and whatever. I don't know that any of those are that much different because it's co-working. It's probably why you see so many spaces happening now, because people think or see it as an easy solution that if you've got a building sitting empty, like, oh, we'll just do co-working and it's all going to work out or whatever. I mean, we've tried to stay in front of some of those challenges by really trying to curate who the tenants are here and look for, great people that are going to be a good fit and also a long-term fit. And I think that's something that makes Battery a bit more special. We're probably less of a co-working space and closer to an office building with just a different kind of layout, because everyone in our building has leases, really. So we don't have a nomadic workforce coming through here. We have, some companies have been here since day one. So we're really trying to curate that. You try so hard to keep competitive, or if even lower than market rate, because we want to be able to pick and have the companies come to us that we want to be in here, not necessarily because they're the highest paying or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's the real magic of the space, that it's a curated community of people. And you often say 1 + 1 = 3. And I think that really speaks to the vibe at Battery and what you guys are trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, how can you put a value on, just a lease if we have people, and I can't name everyone here. We have about 20 companies in the building right now, but Chuck Sullivan and Something Independent have been here since maybe before we bought the building. I always tell Chuck one of my favorite photos is the two of us sitting on the back of my Subaru signing his lease, because Battery was just a full-blown war zone of construction at that time. And that was, Chuck and Johnny believing and committing. And then people like Dave Bacon and Keith at Zenman and Marty at Sales Guys, yeah, they pay leases and they enable us to keep this place running. But what they do for the brand of Battery and for the community as a whole in Denver and Colorado and bigger, right? Like it's so much bigger than that. It's hard to put that value on, and we'll do whatever we can to, to try to make sure that battery is the place that all of those companies want to stay. And ideally, the only people we lose are the ones that outgrow our ability to give them more space because they're doing so well. That's our dream.
So something I've always wanted to ask you, we'll change gears a little bit, is what's your favorite photo that you've ever shot?
I don't think I can name a favorite. I don't even know if I can narrow it to 20. My head goes to so many different places. You love photos for different reasons too, right? You might love one photo because it's one of my favorite, snowboard or ski photos. I could name off some of those. There's one of Keir Dillon hanging right here in Battery that I shot on that Burton trip to Chile. And so I look at that one, and it reminds me of, I got this cool shot when there were 5 other photographers there, and I happened to pick this angle, and I got this shot, and I still have that piece of film. And, that's special for a reason. There's a shot I took out of a helicopter in Chile, straight down through the best skiers in the world. And we'd been shooting so hard on that trip. I think Ian and I shot 20,000 photos on that 14-day trip. And I usually stay on top of editing, but I had shot so many photos that day that it wasn't for a few days later when I started going through them all. And it was just a spot in the time that I didn't expect to be that cool. But the 3 skiers were right under the helicopter. The shadow of the helicopter's in the frame. The arcs of the skiers' turns are just art in of themselves. And, so that one's always been one of my favorites. But I mean, there's other photos that I might love because of the memory or the time that it happened. I have one of Shaun White standing at the top of the Breckenridge halfpipe when he couldn't barely even see over the fencing. He's probably 10 or something at that time. And I just feel lucky that I got to stand there at that point and then get to watch, everything he's accomplished. But, there's photos from family vacations, and I've shot, our database is close probably to 1 million photos right now. I don't know how many times I've actually pressed the shutter, but it's in the millions. And I don't know. I love having a camera in my hand.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's what's always so great about photos is it doesn't have to always be the best composition, or it doesn't always have to be in focus, or it really just takes you back to a moment, and there's so much to those moments that are so special to us, and the way to capture that story and take us back and allows us to relive it in a way that nothing else does.
Yeah. And, people, I appreciate that we get a lot of compliments on our photos or our work or whatever. And sometimes it's just, we shoot more and you have the camera with you more, and maybe you make a bit of effort to go get that photo when other people don't, and actually do something with them after, because a lot of people take a lot of photos and never go back through them or sort them or touch them up a little bit. And, there's a lot more to it than just pressing the button. So
yeah, and for me, it just struck with me. I think I might share this with you. I've been personally a little bit obsessed with my own mortality, and I'm kind of going through that. And I think that, what taking a photo does is it allows us to stop time, and there's something that's really profound and magical about that, and allows us to go back and just stop that ticking clock and remember how precious life is and what those moments are. And even sometimes when we're in those moments, we're not always appreciating them as much as we do when we look back.
And I think what's great when a bunch of time goes by, and I see this whether we're going back through our imagery and editing or labeling or looking for shots, but also, we just had the opportunity to film with a family who went around the world with 110 other people in 1963 on a legendary around the world caravan with Airstream. This family, the father was hired by Airstream to be the journalist, and he wrote a book about the trip. He passed away about a year ago, but, we just got to spend time with the mother and the 3 kids, and, they're pulling out photo albums, and one of the kids was only a year old on the trip. So she says that she can't remember the trip, but her memories are all based on either hearing stories or seeing the photos, to which point, and even the kids that were a bit older, they're not 100% sure now whether they're remembering the actual what happened or remembering more the memory now created by looking at the photos. So, you look back through those all these years later, and you also realize it's cool to have photos of the pyramids in Egypt or, other famous landmarks or beautiful scenes. But what really stands out is it's the shots of the people and some of the other stuff that was happening that are those super, super memories. When I look back at, some of my older photography from, say, when I was shooting at Burton, if I look at most of the action shots, I'm like, oh, it's not that, it wasn't that great of an action shot then, and it sure doesn't hold up to, the level of snowboarding and photography now. But if I see a photo and it's, a group of us partying at the Burton House at Mount Hood, you're like, oh man, there's Ross and there's Zach and oh shit, there's Amy who's doing this job now. And you realize it's some of those moments that you didn't think were as important at that time are the super memories now.
Yeah. So Mike, what are you most looking forward to next? What's next for Mike Arzt?
Yeah, this is a struggle for me because I feel you have this mix of as you get older, things maybe, I wouldn't say just get more complicated. I think there are just more things and more opportunities. So you get hung up 1 minute on trying to be the best parent possible or a good friend to your friends or growing a business, or should it be chasing the next awesome trip or pow slash? And I think, unfortunately, sometimes one gets in the way of the other, right? If I maybe got a bit more serious, maybe there'd be another battery now, or maybe our business would be bigger and I wouldn't have to work so much because we'd have more people working. I don't really know. So I think that's the biggest challenge of, do you go away for a week with your family and do something cool, or do you hunker down and work twice as hard, hoping that then that creates an opportunity where you retire 2 years earlier? I mean, we're lucky that we're in this business group called EO because I think we get to hear all these stories of different entrepreneurs trying to make these kind of decisions. And sometimes you have control and sometimes you don't, and the decision gets made for you, right? So I think my biggest decision is, do I want to grow up and get more serious about working harder, or do I want to get more serious about blurring those lines between work and play? And the last thing you want to do is make a mistake and have some FOMO, right? And that FOMO can be buying a building or not going snowboarding.
Yeah, the FOMO is real and it is powerful for sure.
I think FOMO and stress is what's helped me to be successful, and probably both of them seem like negative things, but they're also they help push you, right?
Yeah, that's so hard to miss out on all those opportunities, and it's really difficult. So what would if you ran into your 20-year-old self today, what would he say? What would he think of what you got going on? Maybe some of those questions that you just posed.
Yeah, so at 20 I was traveling. No, maybe not. I was probably just kind of ramping up to a slightly more legitimate career at Burton. At that time, I couldn't even believe that I was working for that company or part of my job involved snowboarding. I don't think I could have ever seen what I would consider this level of success now, of like having pulled off battery and be surrounded by such amazing companies and people and that kind of thing. With Public Works, I probably could imagine that Frank and I would figure something out and scrape by, but I don't think I could have imagined that, companies like Levi Strauss and Whole Foods and Subaru and Jeep and Aspen, Airstream would give us the opportunity to help elevate their brands. I love brands, especially brands with great people and great stories. So I couldn't even imagine some of that stuff, like the ability to go and film and listen to the story of a family that went around the world for 14 months in an Airstream in 1963. I couldn't have even had a wild dream that would have involved something like that.
So Mike, professionally speaking and, looking at your work with the Public Works right now, what are you most proud of?
We're trying hard to look at, we've been working for years on tightening up our core values and our mission statement. And a bunch of that relates to kind of how we are being to our community and our environment. So I feel so far off compared to other companies like Patagonia. But at the same time, it's awesome that there's companies setting such a high standard. So we've made goals for ourselves, and we're going to keep trying to get better. It's awesome right now that Ian's looking into doing carbon offset credits that we build into job costing when it involves travel and that kind of thing. But we've made a pledge from our media team that whatever the nonprofit, it's a Denver-based organization called First Descents. Any way that we can possibly help them, especially from a multimedia standpoint, that we will. First Descents does life-changing adventure trips for young adults affected by cancer and now also MS. Last year, so first off, I went and volunteered at a camp, and my parents went along, which was maybe one of the best things I've ever done with my parents. And as you know, it was cool. Mark and his wife were there the week before, so we kind of got to not only double header that, but kind of both be affected at the same time and in big ways, right? Which you can read about it and you instantly believe in it, but when you go, there's no turning back. So that led to our team going and capturing their MS pilot program last year. And that was a lot of that footage was used on CNN to talk about First Descents and the work they're doing. So then once again, you see this just amazing opportunity. And it shows what the outdoors can do for people. It shows that it's not just about the outdoors, but it's about the challenge of the outdoors, bringing people together closer and in very quick and powerful ways. It shows us once again what capturing content can do, because if we weren't there capturing it, then how do you share those stories to the bigger world? So it feels special to have a skill set that helps elevate those kind of programs. I mean, what's so amazing to me is that was already a huge win, right? We got to go shoot this program, but then we were just together working with Thor Industries, who is the largest manufacturer of RVs in the world. They own Airstream as well as Jayco and a bunch of other brands. So what really lit my entrepreneurial fires was the fact that, initially going and volunteering at this program with my parents and becoming more involved, and then going back and more or less shooting the MS program pro bono for FD. It all felt like good social stuff. And by all means, we were helping other people, but in selfish ways, it does amazing things. Did amazing things for me going too. So, it was all sorts of different things. But then, recently we were able to show that MS short film to one of our clients and have them get on board with what could potentially be one of the biggest content series that we're going to shoot, which is, all about outdoor healing and, the people making those things possible. So if doing volunteer work and putting our skills to use can then lead to profitable work, I mean, I can't imagine a better outcome. And I hope we can continue to look for more ways to do that, because it's such a win-win-win for everyone involved, from the participants at the programs to the nonprofits to the companies that get on board and align with those causes and push, resources and time into them. I mean, to me, that's some things in the world actually clicking right, instead of, just so much of the negativity and shit that you hear these days.
Yeah, it's like the perfect alignment of commerce, social good, putting your talents to work and doing the things you love. It really is the dream scenario. And it's funny when you're talking about the Burton slideshow and seeing your slides up there. We were just recently at the First Descents Ball, and Brad Ludden, who is the founder of First Descents, has appeared on this podcast in season 1. And one of my photos from last year at a climbing program came up, and I just felt, such, amazing pride and joy. But also it took me back to that moment, and it was quite emotional. And remembering those participants in that program. And so just when you're able to do those types of things, and I think for both Mike and I, First Ascents has been an amazing experience, and it's only been elevated by the ability to blend what we do professionally and bring them into the mix and continue to expose other people and organizations like Thor Industries, and to see them light up. I mean, I think that might be one of the biggest gifts. You were just on a shoot in Joshua Tree and we're working with our point of contact there, and hearing how she came to the experience and lit up that, just to spread that and to bring more people to that mission while performing your occupation. I mean, that's really living the dream.
Yeah, and it also opens up other thinking that you wouldn't expect. We just had something cancer related come up in our close immediate family, and First Ascents was the first thing I thought about. Was I have this whole network of people that I can reach out to now, whether this family member needs help or even if I just need help, advice on how can I best support this person. So it also showed me, that's with, oncology or MS, but it just makes me want to look for all those additional opportunities. We obviously have a homeless problem here in Denver, and I want to get more involved. I want to understand more, and I want to be part of the solution, not just complaining, right? So, being part of First Ascents really, really opened up so many different lenses of looking at something like that, it wouldn't have happened without that opportunity.
Mike, thank you so much. That was amazing. And thank you for sharing your story.
Oh, pleasure. And hit up Wild Story and let's keep this conversation going. I'm sure there's a lot of things that we didn't get into that we'd be happy to push on in an online format. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
And that's Mike Arzt. It's important to realize and recognize this isn't one of those I started a business and exited and now I'm filthy rich stories. This is the story about an individual falling in love and finding the flow with life and the work. And that's something I think we all can learn to do a little bit more. Thanks, Mike. Well, that's the show. Until next time. Make sure to visit our website, www.wildstory.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or via RSS, so you'll never miss an episode.
I like big stories and I cannot lie. You other storytellers can't deny. Baby got backstory.
You'll also find free story downloads and resources to help you integrate the power of story into your business.